ourselves in Arctic air. And so, you know, you have these really beautiful summer nights and you come and you see the northern lights dance. And me and my girlfriend were sitting out and watching this, and I could you'd start to hear this little bit of rustling, and then you could hear the sigh and the neigh, and she'd say, "What is that?" And I said, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's the horses." And something must have spooked them. And we had 40 head decide that they were going to move from point A to point B in a hurry, and they ran. And just the sound that makes, having that many and that heavy of an animal move in rhythm with each other, instinctually knowing where they needed to go. It was pitch black, and nobody got hurt. Nobody was interrupted. They knew where they needed to be and go. And just the sound of it, you could feel it through the ground. And I remember thinking, I should be scared, but this is the most beautiful, exhilarating thing. And me and her just kind of sat there holding each other just in case. And when it was done, you know, we had done a lot of extracurricular activities that night, and that was the most thrilling thing that we had done.
Nice.
So I'll never forget that, just the feeling of it. And it's funny that you're, you know, both of you are veterans. One of the, I'm a drummer. I love percussion. So when you were talking about that, I'm like, oh yeah, no, pawn shops. That's the best place for musical instruments. And I'm fully aware of getting them. And I was at a drumming camp, probably 10 years ago now. And there was a veteran that was there, and he was talking about how he had a hard time falling asleep for a long, long while, you know, just from experiences. And he said the reason he got into drumming was that it actually helped him with his sleep and coming in touch with his rhythm. And so what he would do is he would tap out on his thighs whatever beat he was going for, say 120, 140 beats per minute. And he would just concentrate on the beat, boom, 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 and he would keep it going for 2 or 3 minutes. And then he would intentionally and purposefully start to slow it down. And he'd bring it down to 60 beats per minute and hold it, and bring it down to about 40 beats per minute and hold it, and then bring it to like 20 beats per minute. And as he was calming the rhythm, because it was the only thing he could concentrate on, his breathing slowed, his mind slowed, and next thing you knew, he was asleep. And
Nice.
I was like, that is the most genius thing, because I'm a man with a busy mind. I have a lot going on inside this head, and I often find it very difficult to sleep as well. So I started doing that, and I'm like, this is genius. Just out. And I remember knowing that is a secret, because one of the things that I used to do that drove my mother crazy. I grew up as an actor. I started in theater when I was 6 years old. And so I'd be exposed to a lot of like sound technicians and sound rooms and stuff like that. And I remember during a rehearsal one night, the sound tech was just blaring EDM in the sound booth. You couldn't hear it out in the stage. And I'd gone in because I loved the stuff and it was kind of cool. And I remember curling up in the corner, and the next thing I knew, I woke up and I'd fallen asleep for like a half an hour. And I'm like, how can you sleep with this rhythm going? But because it's so steady, like it just knocks you out. And for honestly, 3 or 4 years after that, that was how I'd sleep, was blaring EDM and like death metal. Just anything with a steady like, and it would knock me out. And so I think there's more to that, obviously, and there's definitely a science there. And I love that you had mentioned heart math, because I'm a huge heart math fan. It's and again, this will sound crazy, but I think there is going to be a point where science and religion, which for some reason are opposed, will come together. And I honestly think in my heart that heart math is the key to that, that there is going to be a proof that comes where the two align, and science goes, oh, that's what you were talking about. And religion goes, oh, that's what you were talking about. We were saying the same thing.
Thank you. I am so in agreement with that. I think about that quite a bit when I initially started using terms like spirituality and spiritual connection to horses. I was working at a psychotherapy facility, and they're kind of like, oh, shoo, can't do that. We're clinical here. And this is why we do it this way. And I'm like, so you're telling me that while we do this, it changes these. I'm using a M-wave on the ear with the little coherence things from HeartMath to real-time regulate watch clients' coherence levels in the arena. This was part of my college study thing. So while they're regulating, while this is happening and we're watching the coherence levels change, why can't that be a spiritual connection? Oh, because it's this scientific thing. I'm like, but yes, and not either or. Why can't this be a spiritual experience that is being shown to happen in the body through this neurofeedback? Why can't it be the same thing?
And I don't understand how they got it, because I mean, when you talk about Jung, come on, that's spiritual, for God's sake. Mm-hmm. And if you take it all the way back to Galileo, he was an artist, he was a philosopher, he was a scientist. Where do we suddenly lose this concept that everything just has to be measurable as far as we can see it? Just because we haven't got the tools to measure it yet doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
As I said, there's one of my favorite phrases when I started doing research is there's three great lies. There's lies, damn lies, and there's statistics.
Stats, and lies. Yeah. No,
I had a counselor in the schools. I got trained as a counselor, and we had to do how many people we saw, but we only were allowed 12 sessions. Or actually, was it 12 or 14 sessions? So after the 14 sessions, we couldn't see. We weren't meant to see them. But what we did is we recorded them as a new client. So all the stats said we'd seen with 200, 300 people. No, we'd seen the same people. We'd just give them a break for 3 weeks. But that was the scientific stats. So if we're doing it on that, what else is going on in the scientific stats? I mean, it's just exactly. And also there was a presumption because we'd seen them that we'd actually help them. All the statistics said was we'd seen them. That's all it meant. And I'd had people that I'd seen for 20 minutes. Who I'd done more for in 20 minutes than I'd had somebody who'd had 14 sessions. But that wasn't showing the stats.
If you get a big enough sample group, you can find numbers to support any issue in any argument you want to make.
Yeah. And that again is that great misconception. I love that you pointed it up too. Like we've been a world. It's not just your nation. I'm Canadian. We're a world that has been at war and rightly pointed out for eons, and it doesn't stop. But it's the awareness of when it affects you, that's when you pay attention. And I think it's important that we realize that we are actually all connected. And you'd actually brought up an interesting point, Jake. You had said that there was no point in retelling your story. It was, it wasn't about the retelling, it was about the healing. And I think that, again, there's no right or wrong with a statement, and that there's layers to that. I think from a therapy standpoint, I think you're 1,000% correct. If if it's not serving you, then there's no point in doing it. But I would argue that there is a point in retelling your story. But it's where you tell that story. Telling it in a therapy session with a 24-year-old woman who has never seen a battle, or even with me, a 43-year-old Canadian who has never seen a battle, may not be the most effective use of that story. But telling it with brothers in arms who are experiencing things and don't know how to get out of where they are right now, and you having found a path, is a reason for telling that story, because the point, when you said there's no point in retelling, I think there is a point in retelling, and the point is connection, because through connection, that's how we find our community. And in finding our community, we find both the people who can help us and the people who we can help. And I think that is the point in telling the stories, having an effective dialogue so that we can start to find the commonalities. Like, we've already found commonalities even within this group of just saying some of the things that we've said and some of the things that have been shared. And we haven't even touched the surface of half of our stories, right? We're barely at iceberg level at this point. And so I think it's that whole finding our community, finding our understanding, telling our story from our point of view. I think there is a point there. Telling your story just because a therapist is on the clock for 12 to 14 sessions and needs the stats. You're right. There is no point in that. And one of the things that I wanted to bring up too, and it's something that I've struggled with basically my entire life, particularly being born in a very rural environment, growing up on a ranch and in a farming community, but being in the arts around those type of people has been very interesting for me, because I have always been referred to or noted as being effeminate, which I think is hilarious, because I'm probably one of the straightest guys I know. But the assumption has always been that while he's in the arts, he's probably gay. Yeah. Again, I've got a lot of gay friends, and I don't care one way or the other. Who you sleep with is who you sleep with.
Tyler, you are so pretty. I mean, come on.
I know. It's a very, very moisturized, well-maintained face. But I, you know, and I've always found that frustrating with having to label things, particularly having to label things masculine and feminine. And one of the things that I would postulate is that we're not binary. Like, it is not this A or B, and it's not even A and B. And I think one of the reasons why we were having such a hard time finding the language to describe the energies that we feel when we're doing some of these things is the world is remarkably diverse. And I can tell you that I've experienced energies with dogs, cats, horses, pigs, dolphins, you know, and they're all uniquely different energies. And I would never classify one as feminine or masculine. There is an energy that comes from my cat when she curls up on my lap and settles in for the night to watch TV. There's also an energy that comes from my cat when I haven't fed her. There's an energy that comes from a herd of horses when they are on a full charge. There is also an energy that comes from a horse when you are alone with them in a field and it is just you and them, and you have worked with that horse for years. And there's an understanding, as you'd pointed out, Jake, that is almost to an ESP level, where you don't have to say a thing, the horse doesn't have to say a thing, and you both know what's going on. And that is a communication, and that is an energy, and I wouldn't classify it as a masculine or a feminine. And there's an energy that comes with dolphins. I remember when my wife and I first got pregnant, I was emceeing a wedding in Thailand and was also part of the wedding party. And my wife would have barely been 3 months pregnant at this point. And we got, we went and did the wedding, and it was two of my greatest friends growing up are brother and sister. And so it was the brother's wedding, Jason, that I went to. And then his sister Vanda's birthday was literally the week later. So we just agreed, we're going to stay in Thailand and party. We're going to party with Jay. We're going to party with Vanda. And I, having been through the world a few times, knew that I did not want to spend most of my time in Bangkok. And so, and I didn't even want to go down to some of the other more touristy destinations. I knew there's this beautiful island, Koh Samui, and we got this little private villa that we rented for Vanda. And it had its own little private beach. And we'd go and we'd swim in the ocean every day. And the third day that we were out, this pod of dolphins came into the bay, and the three of us were swimming, and they just instantly kind of started to hover around my wife. And I've never seen, and I've worked with dolphins. I used to tour guide in Puerto Vallarta. I worked with a good friend of mine, Juan Carlos, who runs Vallarta Adventures, and they have penned dolphins, and I'd worked a lot with the penned dolphins. I've also been out and scuba diving with wild dolphins before in both Mexico and Australia, but I'd never seen dolphins behave this way. And what they did was they came up and they just kind of hovered around Jen, almost like they were protecting her. And
Aww.
and you know, Jen was able to reach out and like touch them, and they were super calm too. Like normally dolphins tend to be very active, and like, you know, they'll play in your wake, or they'll like swim around, or they'll jump, or they'll like do one of these to you kind of thing. These dolphins got super still. They kind of put their blowholes up, and they were like breathing. You could hear them breathing, and and we were just kind of all floating in the water. And there's no way to classify that as masculine or feminine. What it was a very protective energy. It was a calming energy, but they did not, interestingly enough, they did not want me near my wife. So I was like, I come in and then I get that, and I'm like, whatever you just said, Mrs. or Mr., because I'm not looking to see. Like, what was right? But again, I've had all of these experiences where I've shared these energies, and again, growing up on stage, having the opportunity to feel what it's like to connect with 200, 300, 400 people. And now that I speak internationally, the connection you get with 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 people, I would never classify it masculine or feminine. It is an energy. And I think it's this need to classify, this need for statistics, that is really what hinders and hampers our ability to just communicate. Why do I have to tell you what color I feel or where I feel that anxiety in my body? Right now I'm seeing red because you're asking me a stupid question. Like, I don't know that answer, but I can tell you, when a crowd comes and gives me a standing ovation, that I can feel it radiate from here. I know that when I get anxious and nervous and feel stage fright, I also feel it radiate from here. They come from the same area, but they're two entirely different feelings, and yet have the same physiological response. So all of these things, I think, need that communication level, right? And it becomes that understanding. So back to the original point, why do we tell our stories? It's not for the therapy of it, although there can be a very cathartic release in saying something out loud for the first time or for the last time. But it's because when we tell our stories that we can find that community, we can find the people who understand what we're talking about, who, or maybe need to understand what we're talking about, where we say a thing and they go, I want to know more about that. I'm curious. I've experienced, I know what you're talking about at the beginning, but it's this end bit that I don't understand, and I want to understand it. You know, and I think it's through that power of communication, that power of storytelling, that we can find the connection, that we can regain that humanity. The world has been in conflict for forever. That I think it's because we are trying to find literally and figuratively finding languages to explain ourselves, where I think if we can give ourselves up to a little bit more feeling, a little bit more esoteric in our understanding of the world, you know, as Di had pointed out, some of our greatest scientific minds were actually philosophers, you know, and science itself grew out of a want of an understanding of our world and observing those things. I think one of the things that I heard recently, and I loved it, I thought of it a couple of times when everybody was talking, you know, I've never seen $1 million cash, but I know that it exists. And I don't need to see it to know that it exists. It's a concept that I can understand. Or $1 billion cash. Is it possible to have $1 billion cash stacked up on a table? Yes. And it's probably actually not as big as we all think it is. But I don't need to see it to understand its concept. And I think this visual proof requirement that we've come to need as a society is really again, it's one of those things that I think is dividing us as opposed to bringing us together. And I think one of the interesting things that came out of your talk, Jake, too, is even talking about patriotism, right? A true blue, red-blooded American, and I believe in this cause. And I think patriotism is very similar to organized religion, in that there is a difference between faith, spiritualism, and religion. And then further, organized religion, right? Faith is your belief in the higher power, whatever it is you want to give it up to. Spiritualism is allowing that to enter into yourself and be at one with it. Religion is your faith in your spiritualism and your understanding of the world. And organized religion is a whole bunch of people who come together who say, I believe that as well. And it's that root kernel that is the most important, right? It's your relationship with internally with yourself and externally with your environment. And if you can find people who are of like mind, that's great. I love my country fiercely, but I don't think it's right in everything that it's doing, because it's a collective. How can a collective be 100% right? And I only have 1/10 of the population. We're 36 million versus 360 million up here in Canada. And I even think on a community level, my hometown is probably about 15,000 people. And the city that I live in right now, 1.3 million. We can't get along or agree. I can't even find harmony within my own family. And I only have a wife and a daughter. And my daughter and I argued about whether or not she could take a crayon into the truck this morning. So if I can't find harmony in our understanding there, how are we going to be 100% right within our leadership of our countries and our nations? And I think this need to be right and wrong, this binary decision. We talk about masculinity, toxic masculinity, embracing the feminine, and all of these words that are trying to explain just us as human beings going through and experiencing our world. I think that polarization is what the problem is. That doesn't need to be black or white. It doesn't need to be binary. It doesn't even need to be a yin and yang and have dueling polarity. I don't think polarity needs to be the issue. And so again, why should we be telling our story? Why do we need to express ourselves? So that we can find that understanding, so that we can find that commonality. Anyway, that was my rant.
I didn't even get a chance to introduce you. Retroactively, for those of you listening, Sean Tyler Foley joining us today from Alberta, Canada, is also a coach, consultant, inspirational speaker, hence his standing ovation comments, and also an actor in this, I believe, 2 great companies. So, and he has had his own very interesting experiences with masculinity and mental health. He even did an interview with me about some of his more intense experiences. If you wanted to talk about any piece of that, I will just vaguely leave that out there to allow him to choose what next he would like to jump into as a topic point over the next 30 minutes.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and again, because I love the idea of communication and sharing, how does that resonate with everybody? Where can we take this conversation next in the next half hour?
Well,
yeah.
Can I jump in a bit? Because
absolutely.
I'm fascinated with this idea of language. I love language, and I like specifically social linguistics. And the difference between the problem is we all deal in this analog communication, don't we? So, but we all think that we're listening in digital. So somebody says like patriotism, Well, it's a presumption we automatically know what patriotism is. We don't. We don't have a clue what patriotism is. I mean, if I talk about British patriotism, you get lots of racists who say that they are patriotic British people, but they're actually not, in my view, patriotic at all, because they're the very people that we went to war with in the Second World War, because that's the views that they hold, and so they're waving and say, "Oh, I'm patriotic. My father fought," and you go, "Well, no, 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 no. Your views are the very views that we fought against." So that's the trouble with words. Everybody hears the words to mean something else, and it's not even that simple. It's where you are at that moment in time. You'll actually hear the words. So that's the problem with talking about things. That's the great thing with horses and dogs. If you turn around and you say to them, I'm not angry. I'm not angry. I'm not scared of that horse. The horse will just look at you and go, you are scared of me, because it can see it. It can smell it. It knows that you're scared of it. It knows you're angry with it, but language is such a deceptive thing because it has so many elements to it. I don't know if that was useful. I don't know, just ranted.
Well, and it's nuance and interpretation.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jake.
No, so we've gone out of our way with the way we've expanded on our own language, specifically speaking, with those of us that are here that are English speakers. We have expanded on our language to the extent that we can intentionally obscure our meaning and intentionally make things more vague, harder to decipher the clarity of. We've done it for legal reasons. We've done it for contract reasons. We do it for manipulative reasons. We do it in our politics. We do it in our marketing. We've got incredibly complicated language. This always makes me think of social media, because even with our verbal communication, as in depth as it is, we also still communicate so much through body language and facial expression. I was taking some classes in sign language, and I was surprised at just how much of sign language is delivered through facial expressions, not just with the hand motions. A lot of the intent behind it is all given through the facial expressions. And one of the dominant forms of communication we have is what we're looking at right now. It's digital. So we communicate by text message, we communicate by email, we communicate by words on social media, and we've lost all of the nuances other than the words themselves. And the number of shit fights that have started for things that are statements that have been misconstrued, or people that have tried to express themselves and not been linguistically fluid enough to get their point across without coming across abrasive or coming across the wrong way. How much could we have been able to avoid had we emphasized more internal conversations in our societies rather than just what words we're putting on a screen in front of each other?
Yeah. Well, and isn't that the truth too? Because as you pointed out, sign language really requires that what not only what the sign means, but what the intent behind the eyes and the expressions are. And the digital world now, where it's all communication through screen and just the written text, there's no nuance to it. I remember I've heard so many different people say, I wish there was a sarcasm font.
Thank you.
and because sarcasm is one of those, it's the base form of humor. I would beg to differ. I like my sarcasm, but they, as somebody who uses it fairly regularly, I'm very sarcastic in my communication. I love the lightness of it. I also really enjoy the juxtaposition. But if I was to type the things that I'm sarcastically saying out loud, I would just be crucified for the words I was saying, because there's no context to it. And I think, on a global scale, not only within our own, English vernacular, or is there this ability to have misunderstanding or choice of word form and where we're going with the words that we use. But then you have added complexities where there are, even within English speaking nations, differences in meanings of words and what they mean. I mean, I still have the queen on my money, but there are words that are used across the pond that do not mean the same thing over here. And, you know, and then you get down under or South Africa and all of them speaking theoretically the same language and speaking them differently, even cross border. You know, we are not that far apart, Canada to the United States. And yet I have no idea what a beanie is any more than you know what a toque is. And yet they are the exact same thing.
I've talked to Australians before that for the life of me, I could not understand, and they were speaking English. I was just like,
So they claim.
Yeah.
You can cross county lines in North Carolina and go through this.
Oh,
We have that in Britain. You go from one part of the country to the other, totally different languages.
Oh, yeah.
Sayings.
New York to Louisiana. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And yet we recognize this, and yet we're still like, well, I said this thing. Okay, well, yeah, you said it, but did I hear it? For one, did I understand it? And, you know, I hate, as a corporate facilitator, by the way, and I do that as a gig. I hate two-way and three-way communication. I have given a message. You have heard a message. Have you been able to retransmit that message back to me so that I know that you understood that message?
Duplication. What?
Yeah, I know. But I mean, the theory is true. I'm going to use words. And again, we're going to have trigger words. Patriotism being one of those ones right now. Like, what does it mean to who, to where, to when? And it depends entirely regionally where you say that word, who you say that word to. And, you know, I hate the Canadian flag right now. Absolutely hate it. I have a violent reaction to seeing it. My wife and I both do, because we had a huge protest that started in my hometown. You know, people, patriotism and take back the country. And I didn't know that the country had been taken away. So I didn't know that we needed to retrieve the country. And, you know, they were set up and in my opinion, being very disruptive, but they had their belief, and they had absolutely every reason to have their belief. But then they took a symbol of a nation and literally took it back. Now every time I see a maple leaf, I go, oh, fucking yahoos. Oh my God. Right. I can't. And it because of the meaning that it has taken on to me, that's a symbol. It's just a symbol. So imagine words and the complexities of it, because there's so much that goes into how this one piece of cloth has now created a reaction inside me to make me go, eh. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about words and other forms of communication, it's so hard for us to do. And I think that's one of the great things about working with animals, is you have both pointed out, they don't talk back. And sometimes you need to not talk. You need to listen.
There's no deception.
Feel. Yeah. And this isn't the only thing that you can listen with. You know, and that's, again, why I love heart math, Jake. I absolutely love heart math, because there's a lot of processing that happens in between this part that filters out what needs to be heard here. And I love the heart math study for showing when we are in alignment and when we are out of alignment, and what those two scientifically look like from a biorhythm standpoint, and what it looks like when we're in alignment, when we're out of alignment, and being able to say this is scientifically how I know. I don't know. I love that we needed science to prove that. Yep, I'm in alignment.
Yep.
Yes, you are, according to this graph. Yeah, I could have told you that.
Yep. Not only that, but with it's so cool that not only can we learn how to bring ourselves back there as well too, you know. And it's a shame that for some people it's taken a tool to be able to show them how to bring themselves back there again. It's taken a digital tool to be able to bring attention back to the fact that this is a problem.
Well, not only that, but a principle that has been known we want to talk language, Eastern and Western medicine. Yeah. Eastern medicine has known this for, eons,
Yeah.
like a written record of at least 6,000 years of knowing when your heart and your head are in alignment, and even have graphic illustrations of what those two look like that are not very dissimilar to what the scientific graphs look like now. So I think, again, I feel that we are on this precipice of relearning lost knowledge. And whether that's Toltec knowledge or Stoic mysticism or ancient Egyptian, it doesn't matter where we're coming from. I think that, again, I've never seen $1 million cash, but I don't need to know that it exists. I don't have any basis for my faith in this theory other than I feel it to be true. We are pushing towards a point where, because I think the world is tired. I think if everybody could give like one adjective for how they feel over the last 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, I think we're just tired. Like, I'm exhausted. I don't know why. It's because I'm feeling the energy of an entire planet, almost 8 billion people. We're all exhausted. Why? Because I think we've lost touch with what makes us human and grounds us. And that's our connection to nature, our connection to each other, our connection to selves. And that's why I think, again, what's the point of telling your story, Jake? Not for therapy. Don't tell your therapist. But there's a huge power in telling your story from a connection standpoint, from finding a community and finding a larger community within that, finding those people.
I agree with that.
Who need
I
to
agree
hear
with
it.
that 100%.
Yeah.
There's this emphasis that the system wants to make us all believe that it's individuals have got a problem. Now, in the Western world, we have so many people who are ill. So how is it the individuals are the ones that have got the problem? Surely it's the system that needs to change, not the other way around, because it's making it.
Oh gosh, I forgot who the quote is from, but I love the statement. It is no measure of good health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society.
And we're all waking up to that. We know the planet is dying because we're basically raping the whole planet. So the system we've got is just not working. So it's crazy. It's insane.
Yeah, it's a great feedback loop.
Yeah.
Yeah, but as we come together also as individuals and supporting one another to heal and to become more self-aware, that is also important. Like our responsibilities as individuals to be role models and to just start as one person, because as one person, we can make a difference. And it might take a little bit for that ripple to go out into the world and become larger to take over the system. But I think it's important to acknowledge both sides of that.
Yeah, but ripples start from a small ripple, don't they? So there's this emphasis, we all need to do these massive things. We don't need to do a massive things, because if we have one little ripple, that can change the world. We've been told it can't, that these so-called experts know better than everybody else, and they don't.
Well, and if you will indulge me, seeing as I got 20 minutes left, and I'm going to take up 10 minutes of it, and I'm going to tell you a story about ripples. Because, again, I have had the extreme joy and privilege of getting to speak internationally for many, many, many years. And I've been on some very, very large stages with some of the biggest names in the industry, from Les Brown to Phil Town, Tony Robbins. And the biggest impact I've ever seen, came from a small conference in Invermere, BC, Canada, attended by, I think, 50 to 60 people, by a speaker who nobody knows really outside of a very small group of people. His name's Jared Morrison. And he gave a talk called The 10-Minute Time Machine. And what you need to know about Jared is when he was younger, in his early teens, he had terrible, terrible migraines, horrible headaches. And when he was 15 was the first time he was prescribed opioids to deal with the pain. because, Tylenol just wasn't working. And so if the, T1s and the T2s don't work, well, we have a new number, T3. Try this out, see how it goes. And slowly over time, Jared developed a dependency and an addiction onto those pills. And as he progressed in his life, and as he grew up and entered adulthood, he got married, had children, but his dependency on chemical addictions didn't wane in any way. And so Jared started to spend a lot of his time focused on trying to find his wife. It ended up costing him his marriage, his addictions. So his wife and his children were separated. It cost him his job. He had a very, very high profile job with a very large, well-respected organization, and basically in his mind cost him everything. And so he had made it a very concentrated, deliberate effort to find the right combination of alcohol and pills that would end his life in a way that was accidental enough that his life insurance would still pay out to his children, because he thought that that was the one thing that he could give his kids. And he felt that they would be better off, their lives would be better off if his life wasn't part of it. And the irony is, when he was fired from the one job, he ended up getting a new job as a life insurance salesman. So he knew all of the ins and outs of exactly how to do this and what would trigger a payout and what would stop a payout, what he needed to do. So he was very methodical in what he did. And it's also very scary for him to share this in front of a room full of 60 strangers, given that his vocation is selling life insurance, saying, I spent the better part of a decade trying to end mine this way for this reason. So he did this talk called the 10-Minute Time Machine. And he talks about the mindset that brought him to this, and what he was trying to accomplish, why he was trying to accomplish it, what his methodology was, what his habits were, what his routine was in coming up with this. And his routine would be that he would eat a Rice Krispie square. We'd go to 7-Eleven or a convenience store, and he'd buy a Rice Krispie square and a Slurpee, so an ice drink, an icy, and then he would come home. The Rice Krispie square would be the one thing that his stomach could tolerate, because he was about to pump a whole bunch of chemicals into it. It was the one thing that would allow those chemicals to absorb without him having to puke. The Slurpee or slushy was the quickest delivery method for him to be able to take in large quantities of alcohol while mixing it. It was the right kind of mix, because it was super sugary and super sweet, so he could throw in his beverage of choice. And then he knew some very generous pharmacies that didn't ask too many questions, and he would make his circuit to get these different combinations of pills. And then he would write down what he was going to try that day, and then he would take these things down. And there was a family event that he had to go to, so he had to fake his sobriety long enough that he could function in this event this one day. And he pulled it off very well, very convincingly. And his ex-wife and her new husband needed a break. They'd been full-time caregivers of the kids, and they needed a night to themselves. And Jared appeared to be functioning very well. And so they convinced themselves that it would be okay for him to take the children, who he had lost custody of at this point 2 years previous, for the night. What's the harm? How could it go wrong? So he takes the kids, stays sober, gets them fed, gets them to bed, goes to bed himself. He's like, you can hit pause on this, Jared. Not tonight. We don't need to do anything. We've got the kids. But what happens when we get into habits? falls asleep, wakes up, cool, missed my deadline. Leaves the house, goes and gets his snack, comes back, starts getting into the routine, does some things, wanders off to the bathroom, looks in the room and sees the kids. Nope, it's got to be a hallucination. These drugs are kicking in quick tonight. Can't be the kids. They wouldn't be here. Why would the kids be here? And then it starts this tizzy. So he's like, no, I'm hallucinating. I've got to get more chemicals into me. So puts more chemicals into his body. But the kids are still there. Very confusing for him. Doesn't know why. Goes to the couch. He's going to let this play out the way that it's going to. More chemicals, more pills. Kids still there. Can't figure it out. And that's the night that he got the combination right. And as he's trying to literally get the kids out of the house chemically, which we know is a physical impossibility, he's now wasted the entire evening doing this pursuit, and it's now 6 o'clock in the morning, and his son gets up hungry, wanting breakfast. And he comes and he says, Dad, are you okay? And in that moment, Jared realizes, no, he is not okay. And things are going south, but he can't articulate because he has so many things inside of his body that are preventing him from actually even moving his mouth. At this point, he's paralyzed on the couch, and things are starting to narrow and things are pinpointing, and he can just barely see his son. And he has this thought. He goes, it can't be now. It can't be today. It can't happen this way. You can't have gotten it right on this day. And so he musters all of his strength and he says, help, and passes out. His son, having enough wherewithal to know that something isn't right with his dad, phones 911. Paramedics come. They check his pulse, which is flatlined at this point, get him into the ambulance, start CPR, get him trying defibrillation, do get a rhythm back. He was clinically dead for 2 to 3 minutes. Get him to the hospital, get his stomach pumped. World blows up at this point for Jared. And rehab is definitely in his future. There is potential criminal proceedings going against him. He thought he had hit rock bottom. That was his rock bottom at that point. And when he tells his story, the 10-minute time machine, the reason he calls it the 10-minute time machine is if he could go back and change just the 10 minutes and relive that, would he change it or keep it the same? And he says he would keep it the same. He wouldn't change anything of that experience. He needed to almost be snuffed out of existence to realize that his kids were in fact better off with him in his life, or with them in his life and him in their lives, than if he hadn't been there, that he would have missed all of these things. He needed that moment of clarity that came literally at the finality of his existence for a moment. So he's telling this story. And again, there's about 50 or 60 people. It's a very, very small, very intimate 2.5 day weekend called Life by Design. And in the audience, there was this woman. Her name is Charlene. And Charlene had been gifted a ticket by another friend of hers. And out of politeness, she decided to attend, knowing full well that what the event running Friday, Saturday, Sunday, on Monday, she had a spot picked out on a mountain range that overlooked the lake. It was her favorite place to go. And she'd recently purchased a rifle, finished polishing it on Thursday. She's going to do this event Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And then Monday, she's going to hike up to her spot and she's going to take herself out of existence because there is no reason for her to be in this world until she hears Jared speak. And it touches her because she's hearing this message that she's heard from other people. But this is the first one that touches her because she starts thinking of her own daughter and what her daughter is doing and what her daughter will do if she's not there. And she starts thinking of the friends that are there to support her. A friend that had gifted her this ticket, who cared enough about her, knowing that she was struggling, but wasn't really sure how to help her, thinking maybe this will be the thing that helps. And ultimately it was, because she heard Jared's message. She heard it the way that she needed to hear it at the time that she needed to hear it. And it clicked with her. And so she reached out to him. She said, listen, I need help. And then she reached out to some other people. She found the support that she needed. She got in connection with the right help, the right support. Fast forward a year later, she reaches out to the organizer and says, I want to be involved, and I want to speak about my experience that I had at this event last year. Is that a thing that we could do? She's never spoken before, ever. She's not a public speaker. She just had an experience and she wants to share. And the organizer said, yes, absolutely. I think that would be powerful. Here's your half hour. Go for it. So Charlene tells her story, and she tells it from her perspective and her point of view and what she experienced in that room, what it was like hearing Jared speak, hearing another lady, Vanessa McWilliams, speak about her struggles with addiction and alopecia, and what it was like growing up as a 14-year-old girl being bullied because you don't have hair, and hair being a huge identity as a girl, and, you know, wanting to kill herself. And then hearing me do my presentation about your river, your dreams, and how you have the ability to find the flow within your life and what it will do. And, you know, and I talked about the Dice Man and a weird book that I read about a guy who made all of his decisions by rolling a dice. He'd write them down, and these were the options that you had, and you'd roll the dice, and whatever the dice said was what he was going to do. And she started doing that. She found a relationship that mattered to her, and she started dating this guy, and life, all of these things happened in the last 365 days for her that would never have happened if she'd gone through with the other option. And she shares this story, and this time there's probably 40 people in the room, slightly less attendance, a little bit more intimate. 3 people in that room reach out to her the following day, various stages of planning, and say, I need the help. How can you help me? And it's that bit of a ripple. Jared found the bravery to tell his story in a way that was amazing, by the way. Jared is a beautiful orator. You know, he grew up in the arts. That's how I know him. We acted together. He's one of the smartest men that I know. You laugh in that, you cry in that story. It moves you. It takes you through the entire human experience, which is what good stories do. And he managed to change Charlene's trajectory. And then Charlene managed to change these 3 people's trajectory. And that's all I know of this story. I don't know where the ripple goes from there, but it started with the one little bit, somebody being brave enough to share what they had to say, that managed to have multiple impacts. Jared saved at least 4 lives that day. And that's amazing. And that's the power of our story. That's our ability to find connection and our ability to find our community. And before Matthew comes up, one of the things that I'd like to share is one of the great bits of connection that I got was I suffered a medical incident when I was 17 that paralyzed me, the left side of my body, for over a year. To this day, we don't know what it was. I've had multiple theories. There are many diagnoses. I saw both Western and Eastern medicine. All I know is that I had fantastic care, and the people that invested in me made it so that I was able to walk, sing, speak again, because there was a point where I couldn't. And one of the things that I found interesting was I had the opportunity, because of that experience, to know what it was like to feel disconnected from my own body and really unable to perform a way that I had literally the night before been able to do. I went to bed New Year's Eve, 1996, fully functional Tyler Foley, woke up New Year's Day, 1997, and the left side of my body didn't work. And it was all ripped away very, very quickly. And so in 2002, I had the extreme joy and privilege of getting to perform in a TV movie, made for TV film called Door to Door, about the life of Bill Porter, who was one of the most successful door-to-door salesmen in the Watkins company. And Watkins sells, products door to door, very similar to Amway. And what made Bill Porter stand apart and what made his story so incredible and what made it such a joy and an honor for me to be a part of it is that Bill had cerebral palsy and would not and did not let anything stand in his way of achieving his goal and following in his father's footsteps and being one of the top door-to-door salesmen in the Watkins company. And to be a part of that story and to get to, lead into Matthew, who's going to tell his own story, is just a joy and a privilege. So I want to thank you all for listening to what I had to say, listening to my stories. And I will turn it over so that we can hear from Matthew and hear his story.
Oh, that's awesome.
Sean, thanks. That was dope. Thank you for